Hi guys, how are you today? After a hard working day, let's relax with this journey through history. If you're as excited as we are to dive into this captivating journey, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on more adventures into the past. Let's uncover the mysteries of the frontier families together. Hit that bell icon too so you're always first in line for the next historical adventure. The night was quiet. A soft blanket of snow covered everything, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the sharp bite of winter. Outside, the world seemed to stop, as though frozen in time. The snow fell slowly, each flake drifting down with no urgency, landing softly on the ground. The air was still, save for the occasional sound of the wind pressing against the walls of the small cabin. Inside the cabin, warmth gently radiated from the small stove. The light from the oil lamp flickered, casting soft shadows across the room. There was no need to hurry. The slow, steady rhythm of the fire, the warmth it offered, and the peaceful quiet of the cabin were all that mattered. The family inside, gathered together in the quiet, felt no pressure of the world outside. Time moved slowly here, just as the snow fell, almost imperceptibly. The father, having just returned from checking the traps outside, placed the bundle of branches near the stove. His movements were deliberate, measured. There was no rush, no reason to move too quickly. The cabin, with its simple furnishings, was a refuge from the harshness outside. The fire crackled quietly, offering its steady warmth to all who sat near it. The mother sat beside the children, her hands moving gently as she prepared a simple meal. She did not speak much, but her actions were filled with purpose. The children, sitting near the stove, watched her with calm eyes. Their world at this moment was small and simple, defined by the warmth of the fire and the security of being together. The father joined them, sitting by the fire, his face calm, his movements unhurried. There was no need to speak of the cold outside. There was no need to speak of the future. The present was enough, and in that moment nothing more was needed. Outside, the world remained still. The snow continued to fall, uninterrupted. Inside, the family carried on in their quiet way, each person moving about the cabin, performing small tasks without urgency. The simple acts of preparing food, checking the fire, and sitting together by the stove seemed to fill the space with a quiet comfort. The mother glanced over at the father. There was no need for words. Their shared understanding was enough. The children, too, felt the quiet. They were safe here, in this small space, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of their parents. As the evening wore on, the cabin grew darker. The soft glow of the lamp was all that illuminated the space. The family continued their quiet routine, undisturbed by anything beyond the walls of the cabin. Time passed slowly. There was no rush to do anything, no reason to seek anything outside of this gentle moment. In the stillness of the cabin, there was a kind of simplicity that felt timeless. The family had no need for anything more than what they had in this space. The cold outside, the long winter night, were distant thoughts, as the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the evening were all that mattered. There was no excitement here, no urgency, just the slow, rhythmic passing of time, marked only by the gentle crackle of the fire. The family, together in this small cabin, moved through their night in a quiet harmony, unhurried and content. The simple moments, shared together, formed the essence of their existence. In the quiet, there was peace. And in the peace, there was everything they needed. This is how time moves in the quiet moments of life. No hurry, no rush, just a gentle unfolding of the present, moment by moment. The family, like the snow outside, moved slowly and steadily through their evening, undisturbed, finding warmth in each other and in the simplicity of their shared existence. The world beyond the cabin was distant, and for now, it did not matter. The days grew shorter, and a subtle change settled over the land. It was not sudden, but rather a slow, almost imperceptible transition that occurred over the course of many mornings. The warmth of autumn faded gently, and in its place came a coolness that seemed to deepen with each passing hour. The air, once thick with the warmth of summer, began to feel lighter, crisp and fresh. It wasn't the biting cold that winter would eventually bring, but a softness that marked the first signs of its arrival. The leaves on the trees, still clinging to their vibrant hues, began to fall more steadily. They drifted through the air, coming to rest in soft piles on the ground. The wind, at first barely noticeable, began to stir more frequently, moving through the branches and rustling the fallen leaves. There was a certain stillness to the air, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the cold to come. But for now, the shift was quiet, almost unnoticed. Each day, the sun rose a little later and set a little earlier, the familiar rhythm of the seasons gradually adjusting to the quiet onset of winter. The days, though still long enough for work to be done, had a certain softness to them. The light that filtered through the trees in the late afternoon no longer held the warm golden hue of summer. Instead, it was a softer, cooler light, more diffused and gentle, as if it too was preparing for the stillness of winter. In the mornings, there was a distinct shift. The breath of the earth, once heavy with the heat of summer, now exhaled coolly, and the grass beneath the feet was no longer soft but crisp with the first frost. The mornings were quiet, with no rush to start the day. The cold was still gentle, and it only deepened the stillness that had begun to settle in the air. It was not harsh, but a quiet reminder that winter was near. The ground, which had once been warm underfoot, now held a thin veil of frost in the early hours of the day. The edges of the leaves, the tips of the branches, all bore the first traces of winter. The frost appeared in the quiet moments before the sun's warmth could reach the earth. It wasn't the harsh, biting cold that would follow, but it was the first sign that the rhythm of the seasons had begun its shift. With each morning, the frost came a little earlier and stayed a little longer. It was a subtle change, easily overlooked, but it marked the beginning of winter's arrival. The trees, standing tall against the sky, seemed to accept the change with no complaint. Their leaves, now gone, left behind only their bare branches, stretching upward like quiet gestures of acceptance to the coming cold. There was no resistance, only a quiet acceptance of what the season would bring. By midday, the air still carried that coolness, but the sun was able to warm the earth just enough to provide a temporary respite from the cold. It was as if the land, the trees, the sky were all gently preparing for the cold months ahead. There was no hurry, no rush. The earth did not tremble or shake with the force of the coming winter. It simply softened, adjusted, and prepared for what was to come. In the evenings, the chill returned. It settled over everything, touching the edges of the land, the trees, the small cabin where the family spent their nights. There was no sharp wind, no violent gusts. It was the quiet chill of the earth settling into its natural rhythm. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the evening air grew cooler still, and the first frost would form once more, coating the earth in a delicate blanket. The family, inside the cabin, went about their evening rituals with a sense of ease, as if the cold outside had become a familiar part of the world. The fire was kindled slowly, its glow soft and steady, filling the cabin with warmth. There was no need to rush. The cold would remain outside, just as it had always done. Inside, there was warmth, a slow and steady rhythm of daily life that moved in time with the seasons. In these quiet days, when winter made its subtle first appearance, there was no urgency. The land simply adjusted to the season, its movements slow and deliberate. The cold came not with a rush, but with a soft, almost patient presence. It was the first sign that the world was shifting, but it was a shift that was as natural as the turning of the earth. The family, in their quiet cabin, adjusted with the land, moving through their days as they had always done, waiting for the full embrace of winter to arrive in its own time. As winter settled deeper into the land, the rhythm of daily life in the cabin became steady and familiar. The fire, though it flickered and crackled softly, was always a gentle presence. Its warmth, though not overwhelming, filled the room with a calm that allowed the family to move through their day without haste. The stove, carefully tended, created a quiet warmth that kept the cold at bay, but it was not a fiery, consuming warmth. It was subtle, like the quiet passing of time itself. Each task was done with intention, without urgency or distress. The mother stirred the pot on the stove, her movements slow and deliberate, as though she were following an ancient rhythm that had been passed down through generations. The children, wrapped in thick blankets, sat near the fire, their eyes half closed in the softness of the moment. The father moved about the cabin, checking the fire, adding a log when needed, adjusting the kindling to maintain the warmth. There was no rush to any of it, just a steady, unfolding rhythm that matched the quiet passage of the day. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and constant, covering the ground in a gentle white blanket. It was not the kind of snowfall that demanded attention. It did not disrupt. Instead, it was part of the natural flow of the world. The family, inside their cabin, continued to move in harmony with it, following the steady rhythm of their daily lives. There was no need for excitement, no need for fear. The cold, though it pressed against the walls of the cabin, was not something to resist. It was simply there, as part of the world, as part of the rhythm they had always known. In the morning light, the cabin was filled with the soft glow of the rising sun. The light filtered through the small window, casting a pale yellow glow across the room. The family, though quiet, moved together in their small, familiar tasks. The mother prepared the morning meal, her hands moving slowly and carefully as she worked. There was no hurry. The bread, though simple, would rise slowly, just as it always had. The coffee, made over the gentle heat of the stove, filled the room with a familiar scent that added to the calm atmosphere. The father, after checking the traps and ensuring the fire was well tended, took a seat near the stove. There was no rush to start the day. The children, still wrapped in their blankets, moved quietly, gathering near the warmth of the fire. They, too, understood the rhythm. There was no need for words to be spoken. Each person knew their role, and each person moved through the day in their own time, in harmony with the world around them. It was the small tasks, these quiet, repeated actions, that held great importance. The simple act of preparing a meal, of checking the fire, of moving through the day with purpose, kept the family in sync with the natural flow of the world. There was no sense of urgency, no tension in the air. Everything was done with care, and everything was done slowly, as though there was no place else to be, no rush to arrive at the end of the day. The fire, though it had no voice, was the constant companion of the family. It offered no dramatic gestures, no sudden bursts of warmth. It was steady and persistent, a quiet force that shaped the rhythm of the day. Its flames rose slowly, licking at the wood, consuming it with gentle persistence. The sound of the fire was not harsh, just a soft crackle and pop, like the quiet sighs of the earth. In the early morning hours, before the sun had fully risen, the fire was the first thing to greet the family. The father added more logs, watching the flames rise and fall, knowing that the fire would persist as long as it was tended. It was a comforting thought. The fire would not burn out unless they allowed it to. It would continue, just as the seasons continued, just as life continued. As the day passed, the fire remained steady. The mother moved in and out of the room, adding kindling when needed, adjusting the heat of the stove, but she did so with quiet, measured steps. She did not rush. The fire, like everything else in their lives, moved in a slow, deliberate rhythm. It was not something to fight against or to hurry. It was simply there, a companion in the quiet hours of the day. Outside the cabin, the snow continued to fall. It was not the kind of snow that demanded attention or forced anyone to act. Instead, it was a soft, persistent fall, a blanket of white that gradually covered everything it touched. The world beyond the cabin was quiet, peaceful and steady, just like the life inside. The family, as they moved through their day, did so with a sense of ease, moving with the rhythms of the land. There was no rush to complete the day's tasks. There was no need to hurry. The cold was part of the world, but it was not something to be overcome. It was simply a presence, and the family understood it. They had lived with it for years, and they had learned to move in harmony with it. As evening approached, the fire continued to burn steadily, its warmth filling the cabin. The children, having spent their day near the stove, now rested quietly near the fire, their eyes heavy with sleep. The mother sat beside them, her hands folded in her lap, gazing at the fire. The father, after his evening check of the traps, joined them by the stove. The room was quiet, filled with the soft sounds of the fire and the slow, rhythmic breathing of the family. There was no need to speak. The rhythm of the day had been enough. The cold outside, the storm that had been growing stronger as the day passed, was just another part of the cycle. The family, inside their cabin, had already moved in harmony with it. There was nothing to fight. There was only the slow, steady rhythm of life, moving with the seasons, moving with the land. The day had passed, and as the family sat quietly by the fire, there was no sense of urgency, no desire to hurry through the moments. Everything had its time. The fire burned steadily, and the family moved through their tasks without haste. It was the way of the world, the rhythm of life, slow and deliberate, nothing forced, nothing rushed. In these quiet, simple moments, the family found their peace, and in that peace, they found the strength to face whatever came next, with the same steady rhythm they had always known. The day moved on slowly, unhurried and steady, just like the seasons that had passed before. In the cabin, each task was done with a calm, practiced rhythm. There was no rush, no urgency, just the steady progression of time and the work required to maintain the home and warmth. The fire, which had burned steadily through the night, was now a soft, gentle glow, crackling quietly as more logs were added. The father had gone outside earlier to check the traps, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he was one with the world around him. There was no need to hurry. He walked across the snow, his boots sinking softly into the blanket of white, and paused only for a moment to observe the stillness around him. The snow continued to fall, but it did so in its own time, gently covering the earth. The animals had long since retreated into the shelter of the trees, and all that remained was the steady silence of winter. Inside the cabin, the mother began to prepare the evening meal, moving with an almost meditative precision. Her hands moved smoothly as she tended to the cooking pot on the stove, each movement purposeful but without haste. There was no need for hurry. She was not just preparing food, she was maintaining a rhythm, a balance that had been established over years of simple, unhurried living. The children, already familiar with the quiet pattern of the day, sat near the fire, wrapped in blankets, their heads resting against one another, content in the warmth and quiet that surrounded them. The rhythm of the cabin was the rhythm of nature itself, steady, predictable, and without drama. The fire crackled in the stove, the warmth of the room pushed back against the cold of the night, and each family member moved through their small tasks with a sense of purpose. There was no hurry, no rush to complete anything. It was enough to simply move through the day, one task at a time, at the pace of the world around them. As evening approached, the family began to prepare for the night ahead. The stove was carefully checked, and more wood was added to the fire. The father, having completed his work for the day, now joined the family by the stove. He took a seat near the children, his body relaxed, his eyes distant as he gazed into the flickering flames. His role, for now, was done. The work of the day had been completed in its time, and the slow rhythm of the evening was now upon them. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly, but it did not seem urgent. The snow, though still falling, continued its quiet dance, drifting down and settling gently on the earth. The family could hear the soft whistle of the wind as it brushed against the walls of the cabin, but it was not a threat. It was simply part of the landscape, part of the world they lived in. They had seen it before, and they would see it again. Inside, the atmosphere remained calm. The fire continued to burn steadily, its warmth filling the room, pushing back against the cold. The children, who had been sitting quietly near the stove, now curled up together by the hearth, their eyes growing heavier with the passing of the day. The mother sat beside them, a soft smile playing on her lips as she watched them settle in for the night. There was no need for words. The evening had settled into its own rhythm, and there was peace in that rhythm. The fire, though small and unassuming, was the heart of the cabin. It burned with a quiet persistence, its flames licking gently at the wood, consuming it slowly, steadily. It did not flare up or burn out quickly. Instead, it maintained a constant, quiet heat, filling the room with warmth that the cold outside could not touch. As the family sat near the stove, the balance between warmth and cold became all the more apparent. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, there was stillness. The cold, though present, could not intrude. It was kept at bay by the steady rhythm of the fire and the quiet, deliberate actions of the family. The father's movements, though few, were always purposeful. He took a small log from the pile near the stove and added it to the fire, watching as the flames responded to the new fuel. There was no sense of haste in his actions, just a quiet care to maintain the steady heat. The mother, too, moved without rush, her hands preparing the final meal for the day. The children, wrapped tightly in their blankets, relaxed against each other, their small bodies warmed by the fire's embrace. The quiet hum of the evening, with its balance of warmth and cold, filled the cabin. As the fire continued to burn steadily, the family settled into their evening routine. There was no rush, no need for anything other than the quiet comfort of each other's presence. The evening, like the rest of the day, moved slowly and gently, with each family member contributing to the rhythm in their own way. The father took a deep breath and leaned back into his chair, closing his eyes for a moment as he listened to the crackling of the fire. The world outside, with its snow and wind, seemed so far removed from this moment, as though it were no longer a part of their world. Inside the cabin, there was only warmth, only the steady rhythm of life. The children, too, rested quietly, their breaths slow and even as they drifted off to sleep. The mother, though she had finished her work for the day, remained sitting by the fire, her hands folded in her lap. She did not feel the need to speak. There was no hurry, no rush. The day had unfolded as it always did, with small tasks that were done carefully and with attention. The warmth of the fire, the peace of the evening, the quiet presence of her family, all of these were enough. They had survived the day, and in this simple survival they had found contentment. The night stretched on slowly, and the family continued to rest in the calm. The cold outside would continue, but it was no longer a concern. The fire burned steadily, the warmth filling the cabin. Inside there was peace. The balance of warmth and cold was perfect, just as it always had been. And in this balance, the family found their rhythm, moving through the evening as though there were no place else they needed to be, no hurry to finish anything. In the quiet of the cabin, as the fire burned steadily and the wind howled outside, there was no sense of urgency. The family had no need to rush. The cold would come and go, as it always had, but it was no longer something to fear. It was part of the rhythm of life, and the family had learned to move in harmony with it. The steady burn of the fire, the quiet movements of each person, and the peaceful stillness of the evening were all that mattered. In these simple, quiet moments, the family had found everything they needed. As the evening deepened, the fire continued its steady, gentle dance within the stove. There was no rush, no urgency. The flames rose and fell in a rhythmic flow, crackling quietly, their warmth filling the cabin. Each log that was added to the fire was met with the same slow response, steady, gradual, without haste. The warmth that emanated from the flames was not overwhelming, but it was consistent. Outside, the wind howled, and the snow continued its soft descent, blanketing the world in a quiet layer of white. But inside, the fire held its ground, pushing back the cold, filling the cabin with a softness that contrasted the harshness of the winter night. The father tended to the stove, placing a fresh log into the fire, his movements calm, deliberate. There was no rush to finish, no sense of hurry. The fire would continue to burn as long as it was tended to, its warmth a quiet force that fought against the cold with no need for force or aggression. It simply was, like the passing of time itself. The family moved through the evening with the same calm, measured pace. The children, their faces glowing with the fire's warmth, sat quietly near the stove, their eyelids growing heavier as the hours passed. The mother, after finishing her tasks for the evening, joined them by the fire, settling into her chair with a soft sigh. She, too, had no need to rush. The day had unfolded in its own time, and now the night would move just as slowly. The father, once again settling near the fire, looked out the window. The storm outside had not lessened. The snow continued to fall, and the wind still whispered through the trees. But there was no anxiety in his gaze. The cold, though persistent, was simply a part of the world they lived in. It was not something to fight, but something to exist with, and in this quiet understanding there was strength. He knew that the storm would pass, just as it always had. The fire would continue to burn, and they would continue to live in harmony with the rhythm of the seasons. There was something soothing about the steady routine of the evening, the fire, the warmth, the quiet presence of each family member. It was a rhythm they had followed for many years, and it brought with it a sense of assurance. The world outside might change with the seasons, and the cold might return each year, but the family's ability to endure was a constant. The small tasks, each one done slowly and carefully, were part of this assurance. The mother folded the blankets, placing them near the fire to ensure the children stayed warm. The father checked the fire one last time, ensuring it was steady for the night. The children, now beginning to drift off to sleep, were comforted by the constant presence of the fire and the quiet security of their family. There was no tension, no urgency in the way the family moved through the evening. Everything was done with care, at its own pace. The fire did not burn brightly and fiercely, but steadily, without faltering. The family did not hurry through their tasks, but completed them with a quiet focus. The cold outside did not threaten them, it was simply there, and they were content with their simple, unhurried lives. As the night stretched on, the cabin remained calm and still. The wind outside seemed to have grown quieter, and the snow continued to fall in soft, even layers. The fire burned steadily, and the family settled into their evening routine without hesitation. There was no need for words. The quiet was enough. The stillness, too, was enough. The father looked at the fire, watching the way the flames flickered and danced in their slow, predictable rhythm. It was not the kind of fire that would burn out quickly, nor the kind that would blaze brightly for a few moments and then disappear. It was a fire that was content in its steady, persistent burn. It offered warmth, but it did not demand attention. It simply existed, just as the family did, moving through the day without rush or strain. And in that stillness, there was strength. In that quiet persistence, there was resilience. The family did not need to fight against the world. They simply lived within it, moving in harmony with its rhythms. The cold, the storm, the winter, these were just parts of the cycle, just moments in time. The fire, the family, and the rhythm of life would continue, slow and steady, as it always had. The fire's steady burn, the family's quiet rhythm, and the slow, deliberate movements of the evening all reflected the strength found in persistence. The cold outside might come again, but the family, in their unhurried way, would endure. They would move through the seasons with the same calm, quiet assurance. The cold would never be a threat, not in the way the world often imagined it. It was simply another part of the cycle, something to be worked with, not against. And so, in the stillness of the cabin, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the presence of one another, the family found their peace. The rhythm of their lives, slow and steady, was enough. The world outside might change, but inside there was warmth, there was steadiness, and there was a quiet resilience that would never falter. As the night settled into deeper stillness, the storm outside began to lose its strength. The wind, which had howled against the cabin for hours, now seemed to murmur in quiet agreement with the rest of the world. The snow, though still falling, came down more softly, a light dusting that blanketed the earth without urgency. It was as if the storm had completed its course and now rested, just as the family inside the cabin had done. The fire, still burning steadily in the stove, continued to provide a soft warmth, its crackles gentle against the silence. It was the kind of fire that required no attention. It simply existed, maintaining its steady rhythm as it had done for hours, unbothered by the cold or the wind outside. It was as if the fire itself had become part of the stillness, a companion to the night. Inside the cabin, the family sat in quiet contentment. There was no need for conversation. The gentle warmth from the fire, the soft rhythm of the night, was enough. Each person, in their own way, settled into the peace that the evening offered. The world outside, with its snow and wind, felt distant, removed from the calm that had settled within the walls of the cabin. The time passed slowly, but it did not seem to drag. The hours moved gently, as though the clock itself had slowed to match the pace of the evening. The fire, though still burning, was now a soft glow, casting a quiet light across the room. The children, once wide-eyed and awake, had now fallen into a peaceful sleep near the warmth of the stove. The mother sat beside them, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes drifting between the fire and her sleeping children. The father, too, sat quietly, his eyes occasionally glancing toward the window, where the storm had now become a faint memory. He did not feel the need to speak or to move. The night, with all its stillness, was enough. There was a simple pleasure in being present, in simply existing in this quiet space. The snow outside continued to fall, but its presence no longer seemed urgent. The family had made peace with the cold hours ago, and now it was just another part of the world. The steady rhythm of the fire, the soft crackling that filled the room, became the only sound. There was no rush to finish the day. It would end in its own time, just as the night had arrived, gently and without haste. The evening moved quietly toward its end, and with it, the family moved toward the natural rhythm of rest. There was no hurry, no rush to begin anything new. The warmth from the fire, the presence of one another, was all they needed. The simple routine of life continued, its subtle rhythm a reminder that there was no need for anything more than what they had in this moment. The family, though physically still, were at peace. The quiet of the evening seemed to wrap around them like the softest of blankets, offering a comfort that could not be measured in words. There was a certain beauty in this stillness, a kind of serenity that could only come from a life lived in harmony with the world around it. It was not an excitement or a drama, but a quiet, gentle unfolding of time, the kind of beauty that could only be found in the slow passing of hours, in the steady rise and fall of the fire. The mother glanced at the father, her gaze soft, and there was an unspoken understanding between them. They did not need to speak. The quiet, the rhythm, the stillness, these were all the conversation that was needed. They had no need for anything more. The night deepened further, and the quiet became absolute. The fire was now just embers, glowing softly in the stove, sending out faint warmth to the room. The world outside, with its cold and snow, seemed so far away, as if the cabin was a separate, self-contained space. The family, now settled for the night, felt no rush, no longing. They were content with the peace that surrounded them, with the quiet that had become a part of their lives. Time, in this moment, had slowed to a peaceful halt. There was no need to measure it, no need to fill it with activity. The family had everything they needed in this quiet presence. The snow continued to fall, the storm now nothing more than a memory, and the fire, though it had diminished, still held its place as the quiet heart of the cabin. As the family drifted toward sleep, the night continued in its natural rhythm. The quiet, the warmth, the soft glow of the fire, they were enough. They had made it through the cold hours of the day, and now they rested, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own rhythm, its own tasks. But for now, there was peace, and that was all they needed. In the quiet of the cabin, the world outside seemed a distant thought. The fire, though small, continued its slow, steady rhythm. The family, in their stillness, had found everything they needed in the peace of the moment. The cold outside, the storm, were not things to fight. They were simply part of the natural order, and the family had found a way to live within it, to move with it, in the calm and steady rhythm of their lives. And in that rhythm, they found their peace. Thank you for joining us. Rest well, take care of your beautiful self, whatever that means to you, and until next time, good night.